The night my mother-in-law forged my name on a legal document, I was lying in a hospital bed in Halifax with a drainage tube in my chest, and a nurse telling me to breathe slowly. I didn't find out what she'd done until 3 weeks later, and by then, she had already moved someone else into my house. She thought that was the end of my story. She had no idea it was the beginning of hers. But before I tell you what happened next, and I promise you, what came next is something she never saw coming in 37 years of getting away with everything. I want to ask you something first. Where in the world are you watching this right now? What city? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, knowing you're out there listening to this gives me something I can't quite name. Go ahead and type it, I'll wait. My name is Nora. I'm 29 years old. I live outside of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And what I'm about to tell you is the most painful, most clarifying, and ultimately most freeing thing I have ever lived through. I need to start a few years back, because the house matters. The house is the whole story. I grew up in Dartmouth, across the bridge from Halifax. My parents were practical people. My father worked for the municipality in water and wastewater services for 26 years, and my mother was an educational assistant at the elementary school I attended. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable, in the way that feels invisible when you're inside it and enormous when you look back. They paid their bills on time. They took us camping in Cape Breton every August. They didn't give me everything, but they gave me something more useful. The belief that if you worked carefully and didn't spend what you didn't have, you could eventually build something solid. I took that seriously. I studied accounting at Dal, worked part-time all 4 years, graduated with no debt because I'd applied for every bursary and scholarship available, and had kept a detailed spreadsheet of every dollar I earned and spent since I was 19. After graduation, I got a junior position at a mid-size firm in Halifax, moved up steadily, and by 26 I was a senior staff accountant with a clear path towards a CPA designation I was already halfway through. At 27, after 4 years of living with roommates in a 2-bedroom apartment in the North End, and saving with a discipline that my friends found either admirable or alarming, depending on who you asked, I bought a house, a semi-detached in Dartmouth, not far from where I grew up. Older, needed work, but mine. I paid the down payment myself. $112,000 that I had saved over 6 years. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office watching them photocopy my certified check and thinking, nobody helped me do this. Nobody co-signed this. This is just mine. That feeling lasted almost exactly 14 months. I had been with my husband Kieran for 3 years when I bought the house. He moved in 6 months later, which felt right. We'd talked about building a life together, and the house was the beginning of that. Kieran was kind, and I want to be precise about that, because this story isn't about Kieran. He was a genuinely good person who happened to have a mother who had been steamrolling everyone around her for so long that she had simply stopped noticing she was doing it. Her name was Renee. Renee was 61 years old, recently retired from a career in property management, which, looking back, explains a great deal. She had spent decades managing leases and tenants and contracts, and she had developed a confidence around legal documents and property transactions that crossed, somewhere along the way, into a complete disregard for whether she was actually authorized to act on something. She was charming the way certain people are charming. Efficiently, selectively, and always in service of a specific outcome. The first time I met her, she complimented my handshake. The second time she mentioned very casually that Kieran had mentioned I owned a home in Dartmouth. The third time she asked what I paid for it. I should have noticed the pattern. I told myself she was just direct. I told myself that some people from her generation simply spoke that way. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be elaborate ways of not trusting my own instincts. For the first year and a half, the tension was manageable. She had opinions about the renovation choices I was making. Too modern, too expensive. Why would you refinish those floors when carpet is warmer? And she had a habit of framing suggestions as corrections. But Kieran and I were happy. The house was coming together, and I had learned to smile through her commentary and let it dissolve. Then Kieran's sister got engaged. Her sister, I'll call her Sylvie, because that is her name, was marrying a man named Clifton, who came from a family that owned 2 Tim Hortons franchises in the Annapolis Valley and had quietly built a very comfortable life through 20 years of early mornings and careful management. Clifton's family was lovely. They were the kind of people who brought wine and stayed to help with dishes and remembered details from previous conversations. I liked them. Immediately. Renee did not like them nearly as much as she liked the idea of what they represented. She became fixated, in the months leading up to the wedding, on the impression Kieran's family would make. She wanted a rehearsal dinner at a restaurant that cost more than some people's monthly rent. She wanted a new outfit that she did not have the budget for. She wanted, most of all, for no one to know that she had spent most of the previous decade moving between rentals, because a series of financial decisions in her 50s had left her without the property equity she thought she'd have by now. None of that was my problem. Or it shouldn't have been. 8 weeks before the wedding, Kieran came to me with a look on his face that I had learned to dread. Careful, apologetic, preemptively guilty. My mother wants to know, he started, if she could use the house. I thought he meant for a gathering, a brunch maybe, a place to get ready on the wedding morning. He meant something else. Renee had found a buyer. A couple from Ontario. He explained this with a kind of exhausted defeat that told me he already knew how wrong it was, who were relocating to Halifax and had been looking at properties in Dartmouth. Renee had, apparently, shown them my house. She had given them a tour. She had described the recent renovations. She had indicated, in terms vague enough to protect herself later, that a sale might be possible. She wanted me to sell my house so that she could use the proceeds to buy herself a condo in Clayton Park and present herself to Clifton's family as a woman of property. I sat with that for a long moment. She wants me to sell my house, I said, so that she looks good at a wedding. She said it would be an investment for both of you because she'd, Kieran. He stopped. I'm not selling my house. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he'd tell her. He told her. She called me directly 20 minutes later and explained, at length, that I was being selfish. That family meant sacrifice. That she had always supported Kieran and this was a chance to give back. That the house was an asset, not a home, and treating it emotionally rather than logically was exactly the kind of thinking that kept young people from building real wealth. I let her talk. I said no. I said it clearly, once, and then I stopped engaging. 2 months later I got sick. It started as what I thought was a bad chest cold, the kind that settles in and doesn't move. By the end of the second week I was running a fever I couldn't break, and my GP sent me directly to the QEII after a chest x-ray showed what she described as significant consolidation in the right lower lobe. It was a severe case of bacterial pneumonia, complicated by a pleural effusion, fluid around the lung, that required a procedure to drain. I was admitted for 11 days. I am telling you this because I need you to understand where I was and what I was not capable of while everything else was happening. I was in the hospital. I was on IV antibiotics and supplemental oxygen. I was genuinely frightened, in the quiet way that fear lives in your body when you realize it is not being dramatic. My parents drove up from Dartmouth and sat with me. Kieran was there every day, sometimes twice. I had my phone, but I was sleeping most of the time, and the days blurred in a way that made the outside world feel very far away. I had given Kieran a key, obviously, and at some point during those 11 days, I still don't know exactly when, and I've gone back and forth about whether knowing would make it better or worse. Renee used that key. She went into my house. She went through my filing cabinet, which I kept in the second bedroom I used as a home office. She found the original deed to the property, my mortgage documents, and this is the part that I still have to stop and breathe through when I say it out loud, a blank authorization form I had printed months earlier for an unrelated purpose and never used, which she filled out in my name, signed with a signature that was close enough to mine that it passed an initial review, and used to list my property with a real estate agent she had apparently already contacted. My house went on MLS while I was in the hospital. The Ontario couple made an offer within 5 days. I found out because my neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Okafor, who had lived next door for 11 years and was exactly the kind of person everyone should have as a neighbor, saw the listing online, recognized the address, and called Kieran's cell phone to ask if everything was all right. Kieran, to his credit, told me within the hour. I remember the exact moment he showed me the listing on his phone. The photos were mine, taken when I'd first listed the house for a rental inquiry I'd gotten 2 years earlier and ultimately declined. The description mentioned the refinished hardwood floors I had paid for myself. The asking price was listed at $462,000. I looked at it for a long time. Then I called my father. I want to talk about my father for a moment, because I think people underestimate what it means to have a parent who doesn't panic. He answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened as clearly as I could, which was not very clearly because I was sitting up in a hospital bed with a drainage tube still in my chest, and I was trying very hard not to cry in a way that would hurt my lungs. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, don't do anything yet. I'm calling your uncle. My uncle Giles is a retired RCMP officer who spent the last decade of his career in financial crimes. He now does consulting work for law firms, mostly in fraud-adjacent cases. He is the calmest person I have ever met, and he is entirely without sentimentality when it comes to what things actually are." My uncle Giles looked at what Renee had done and told me, very quietly, that what I was describing was criminal fraud, the forgery of a legal document, the unauthorized listing of a property, potentially wire fraud, depending on what communications had gone through the real estate agent. He said, "You need a lawyer today, not tomorrow. Today." I had a lawyer by 4 o'clock that afternoon. I made the call from my hospital room with my father sitting in the chair beside me. My lawyer, a woman in her 40s who specialized in real estate and estate litigation, and who had, I would learn later, an almost legendary reputation in Halifax for dismantling exactly this kind of thing, moved quickly. A cease and desist was filed that evening. The real estate agent, who genuinely had not known the listing was fraudulent, cooperated fully and immediately. The listing was pulled from MLS within 22 hours. The Ontario couple's offer was void. Renee received notice from the lawyer the following morning. I was still in the hospital when this happened. I found out from my father, who had coordinated everything with my lawyer while I slept. He sent me a text that said, "Listing is down, lawyer has everything. Rest." And that's what I did. I lay in that hospital bed and I breathed carefully and I let other people handle it for one day. Because that was all I had the capacity to do. I was discharged 8 days later. I went home to my house, which was still my house. And I sat on the couch that I had bought at a second-hand furniture store in Dartmouth. And reupholstered myself the previous spring. And I stayed there for a very long time. Then I went to work. Here is what my lawyer found when she started pulling documents. The signature Renee had forged was imperfect. Close, but not identical to the samples on my original mortgage paperwork. A forensic document examiner confirmed this in writing. The authorization form itself had not been properly witnessed, which under Nova Scotia real estate regulations made it invalid on its face even before the forgery question. The real estate agent's records showed that Renee had initiated contact with the agency 2 weeks before I was admitted to the hospital. Meaning this had been planned, not opportunistic. That last part is the one that sat in my chest for the longest time. She had planned it. She had been waiting for a moment when I would be incapacitated, and when that moment came, she used it. My lawyer filed a police report. The Halifax Regional Police Financial Crimes Unit opened an investigation. Because property fraud in Nova Scotia carries serious weight under both provincial legislation and the Criminal Code of Canada, Renee was looking at charges that her own composure, for the first time in my experience of her, visibly could not contain. I also did something else. For the 3 years I had been with Kieran, I had quietly absorbed a number of expenses that had migrated from his family into our shared life. Not dramatically. This isn't a story of someone writing checks to fund a lifestyle. It was smaller than that, and in some ways harder to name. A loan to Sylvie that was never repaid, that I had covered without being asked because Kieran was embarrassed. A month where Renee's car insurance lapsed and she needed to borrow Kieran's car. Which meant I drove him everywhere for 6 weeks while saying nothing about the inconvenience. 3 years of Christmas and birthday gifts to a family that returned the gesture with dollar store items and the occasional meaningful silence. None of it was money I couldn't afford. But it was mine, and I'd given it in good faith, and good faith is something you can choose to stop extending. I stopped extending it. The costs of my legal proceedings, and they were not small, I documented carefully. My lawyer filed a civil claim alongside the criminal complaint, seeking damages for the costs incurred as a direct result of the unauthorized listing. Legal fees, the forensic document examination, the income I had lost during the additional stress-related medical leave my doctor recommended following my discharge. The claim also included a formal demand for the repayment of the outstanding loan to Sylvie, which, once documented through my own records, Kieran acknowledged without argument. Clifton's family found out. I don't know exactly how. I think it may have been Mr. Okafor, honestly, who mentioned to someone who mentioned to someone. But within 2 weeks of the cease and desist, Clifton's mother had called Sylvie to ask very directly what had happened with Kieran's mother and the property listing. Sylvie told her it was a misunderstanding. Clifton's mother said she would need more information before the wedding could move forward as planned. The wedding was postponed. I was told Sylvie didn't speak to her mother for 6 weeks after that. Renee retained a criminal defense lawyer. The case moved through the system with the particular slowness that legal proceedings in Halifax always seem to carry, and I attended nothing in person until the sentencing hearing 8 months later, which I watched via the court's remote access link from my living room. Sitting in the chair by the window that looks out over the small backyard I had landscaped myself the previous summer. The charges: fraud over $5,000, forgery of a document, and uttering a forged document. Renee pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and 1 count of forgery, in exchange for a stay of the third charge. She received a conditional sentence of 18 months to be served in the community, along with 2 years of probation and a formal restitution order, covering my documented legal costs. She will carry a criminal record for the rest of her life. I closed the browser window. Outside, the backyard was the particular shade of November gray that Halifax does better than anywhere I've ever been. Low sky, bare birch trees. The fence I'd painted myself the first fall I owned the place, and the house around me was quiet and entirely, unmistakably mine. Kieran and I separated 8 months after my hospitalization. I want to be honest about that because I think the tidier version of this story, the one where the villain is punished and the marriage survives, and everything resolves into a clear moral, is less true than what actually happened. He was not a bad person. He was someone who had spent his entire life mediating between his own conscience and his mother's needs, and by the time we reached the end, we had both run out of the particular kind of energy that takes. We divided things fairly. The house stayed with me. Before I go, I want to ask you something. A lot of people, when they hear what Renee did, feel the most about the forgery, the moment she picked up a pen and signed my name. But what stays with me is something smaller. It's the 2 weeks before I got sick. The planning, the waiting, the fact that she looked at me, at my house, at everything I had built without anyone's help, and decided that it was available to her. Do you think I went too far? Do you think the sentence was enough? A lot of people get quiet when they think about someone like Renee. Someone who didn't use violence, who would describe herself as a mother, who was trying to help her family. Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one, and if any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever had someone treat something you built as though it was theirs to manage, please subscribe. New stories go up every week. You are not alone in this. Hold on to the people who actually see you, and hold on to what you've built.